All right, good day and welcome to Ecommerce Today. My name is Darren, and as always, Joshua Warren is here with me, and we're excited to be here to talk about all the things that are happening in commerce, well, today. So Josh, for our topic this time around, we're talking about choosing the right e-commerce agency and making sure that it fits you and fits all of the things about you and where that all plays out. That's one of those really important things. You need somebody that can scale with your business, be able to fit maybe even culturally as well, and just really have the right people and the right mix. So with that as our framework there, let's kick off, Josh, with you on what are those key factors, kind of the first and foremost key factor. Looks like we got about three of them here. What are those key factors that you see in this, in the choosing the e-commerce agency?
Yeah, there's a lot, and there's a lot of ways to choose an e-commerce agency. But I focus on three areas. And the first is industry expertise. And so finding an agency that understands your specific market segment or your industry. And that doesn't have to be an exact match. I know sometimes I'll see these RFPs where it's like, we want to see 7 examples where you have implemented an e-commerce site for a business that does exactly this, this, and this. And you go look and you're like, well, there's only 2 businesses in the world that even do that. So you don't have to get that close, but close enough. For instance, at Creatuity, we do a lot of work with farm and home stores. And so not only is that retail and omni-channel retail, but it's kind of even a little bit tighter of a focus of farm and home stores. So when we start working with a farm and home store, we kind of already know the basics of how their operation's going to work, what their customers are going to expect, that sort of thing.
That totally makes sense. So next up on that, technical expertise. How does that fit into this first avenue of choice?
Yeah, so I feel like my first item I mentioned, everybody says that, but my next 2 are showing my background and my experience, and might be a little controversial in some ways. Before looking at designs, before looking at portfolios, before looking at all the awesome pictures they can show you, I actually recommend you dig into their technical expertise with the e-commerce platform or platforms that you're either working with or considering. So if they have a lot of proficiency, especially, if you're looking at something like Adobe Commerce, and it's something that can be a large implementation. Same thing with Salesforce Commerce Cloud, or, heaven forbid, you're looking at some of those older, bigger enterprise platforms. Technical expertise can really matter there, but even on something like Shopify or BigCommerce, there was an interesting question that came up on LinkedIn the other day that the average BigCommerce agency actually wasn't able to answer. It was only kind of the more experienced agencies that had enough technical experience to understand how, and it was a very obscure thing about basically the firewall and content delivery network works on BigCommerce. So don't assume just because you're going with a SaaS platform that you don't need someone with technical expertise. And then this becomes even more important. There's agencies out there starting to specialize in some newer platforms, especially newer to the US market, things like Shopware. And then there's some that you might not find an agency with expertise in yet, but if you find an agency that stays kind of interested in the leading edge of tech, there's actually a platform out there just starting to gain traction in the US called Medusa. And I don't know if you're going to find a lot of agencies that could say, hey, I have 5 projects that are like yours that are on Medusa, but finding one that has that clear technical expertise that can address kind of a newer emerging platform. And that, not only is going to affect the work that's done on the site and basically is the project successful or not, but that starts to show up in really sneaky ways as well in how the site performs, how the site scales, how costly is it to maintain the site? How hard is it to go to a different agency? If you have an agency that doesn't have a lot of technical expertise and maybe takes a lot of shortcuts and hacks on your site, it's going to cost more to maintain, and it's going to be harder to work with another agency.
Well, let me ask you this, staying right there on that technical expertise, because I really like that. Is there maybe a question or two, and I'm sure there's a bazillion, but just off the top of your head, a question or two that maybe one of our listeners could use next time they're having a conversation and just ask something. And back in my day, it was always kind of stump the chump kind of thing. And I'm not talking about trying to necessarily stump the chump, but you want to be able to ask them a question in a way that they can demonstrate their expertise.
So I think knowing the simplest way, especially if you're less technical, the simplest way is to just ask them, What type of certifications? Well, what type of developers do you have? What's their kind of seniority level? How long have they worked for your company? So are these just freelancers they're bringing in, or are these long-term employees? And then, yeah, what certifications do they have? And that could be a certification in a language, that could be a certification in the platform, but something that shows that technical expertise. Beyond that, especially if you have someone technical on your team you can bring to a call, I always like when people ask, something along the lines of what's the most challenging technical problem that you've solved on this platform and how'd you go about solving it? And there's always fun stories when you get the right people on those calls. So.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great. And moving forward, beyond just the technical expertise, we've also got to have some stability, and it's got to be scalable. How do we look at all that?
Yeah, so again, not in a lot of people's top 3 when selecting an agency, but I really think it ought to be. And the clients I've worked with that kind of regretted some of their choices, this is where most of the regrets come from, is you really want to find an agency that isn't just sitting there and telling you we're going to help you grow, we're going to help you make more money, increase your revenue, but look at the cost side. Look at, okay, what's their plan as your site grows? If it outgrows your current platform, if it outgrows your current hosting environment, what is their plan? Is it going to be, oh, now you just spend more money on servers? Is it going to be, oh, now you have to spend more money to move to a new platform? Or do they have a way to build your site or support your site to allow it to scale and to be stable? And again, we're recording this in October. A month from now, or I guess about a month and a half from now, I know I'm going to get some calls and emails from people that on Black Friday, their site crashes and they realize, oh no, either we selected the wrong platform or we selected the wrong agency. So that experience with just keeping sites up and running. And again, that's where just asking questions about, how do you handle when a site goes down? Lots of times, like when someone asks me that, I typically then explain all the things we do to prevent that from ever happening in the first place. And you can tell there's some agencies that are just so used to fighting fires because they cause a lot of fires that they'll say, oh, we have people on call and we jump on it and we'll fix it and we'll get you back up and running again. But then the agencies that really have that deep experience, they're going to say, well, here's all the things we do up front to prevent that downtime from occurring.
That is so key, and really, really like that. Well, moving on, we've kind of laid further foundation with our key factors, but let's talk about some mistakes. And you've even mentioned one before of kind of regrets that previous clients have had based on their choices. But what are some of the common mistakes that you run into? And the first one up here, always fun.
Oh yeah, so choosing solely based on cost. People really try to make an apples to apples comparison between agencies. And typically the way that boils down is they'll have 3 agencies they're looking at. They'll line them all up and they'll say, that one's the cheapest. Or sometimes they'll say, we have 5 agencies, throw out the most expensive, throw out the least expensive, go with the cheapest that's left. Not usually the best way to make that decision. First of all, anyone that has worked in software e-commerce probably has experience with budget overruns and change requests. That low end of the cost spectrum, you're typically going to get a lot more of those. So there's just agencies out there that they will bid super cheap up front and then do a little bit of a bait and switch on you. And suddenly it's change request, change request, change request. You end up spending as much or more as you would have spent with one of the other more experienced agencies. But then also, these are the agencies, when you go with the lowest cost, many times either they're using freelancers and they're going to be rotating on and off your project constantly. That's going to make things go slower. You're going to lose that institutional knowledge. You may be getting people that aren't as experienced on your platform. But then also, those are the ones that just aren't going to be able to give that stability and scalability. They don't have that depth of experience. So that's where, again, kind of like what we talked about before, your site may be a little less stable, a little less scalable. You may get it launched, but then you may end up actually paying more in the long run for that decision.
Well, yeah, and moving right along with that, we don't want to overlook that cultural fit and being able to communicate with whoever you choose, because that can turn things sideways, and even if they're the least expensive or the most expensive.
Definitely. Yeah. So we've even had I've seen situations where people went with the most expensive agency or one of the most expensive and then regret it. The example I always love to use is we're here in North Texas, and Texas companies typically like to work with Texas companies. Had a client that came to us after they went with a New York company, and like it was almost like the old hot sauce ads of New York City. Like there was just such culture clash that anytime there was any friction on the process, there was immediately like, oh, well, those people down in Dallas aren't getting us what we need, or, oh, those people up in New York are just so rude, and it just wasn't a good fit. But beyond that, and really more than geographical culture, I'm thinking like company values. There's some companies where the most important thing is how fast can you get this done and get it off my plate. There are other companies where it's so much more important to build a relationship, or maybe it's more of a focus on long-term value. It could be a lot of different things. And finding that match between the merchant and the agency that have that shared common value and that common culture is so important. I mean, if you do this right and you have a successful selection of an agency and a platform, you could be working together 5, 6, 7, 8 years or more. You want someone that you're going to enjoy that time working together with them.
Excellent. Well, Josh, the next thing up here, this is one that I'm wondering if people just don't think about this, but the whole failing to ensure that you have data and code ownership. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So luckily, the push to AI, people are starting to pay more attention to who owns their data and how it's stored. But I've been saying for, literally decades now, you need to own your code. You need to own your data. If you go with a SaaS platform, by default, you don't own your code. And nowadays, by default, sometimes you don't even own your data. But that's on the platform side. Even on the agency side, the agency contracts, there's certain things that are normal, like saying, hey, we have some shared code we use on all of our projects, so you have to be aware of that, be okay with that. But then there's some little sneak things in there where they basically are trying to own your code. I actually was talking to someone recently where they're not allowed, their agency literally does not allow them to access the code. I'm like, but you're paying for the platform, you're paying for the implementation of the code, and you literally can't even get view access to it. So you don't want to end up in a situation like that. I mean, they have total control of your business. If they decide that they want to do something untoward, or if they even just want to renegotiate rates with you, what are you going to do? Like, they have your data, they have your code. So definitely be careful with that.
You can end up very, very stuck in a very uncomfortable situation. All right. Well, I already pinged you on this ahead of time, and so once again, I was ahead of myself on our show plan here. But no worries. I had asked you before about some questions that could be asked to these potential agencies, and so now's the chance to maybe go into a little bit more. I asked you specific around kind of just the technicalities of it, but how do they handle scalability challenges?
Yeah, so that's definitely a great question to ask, and just ask them how they look at scaling, like how they plan for future growth, especially if you're considering adding product lines, or especially if you're considering adding a very different product line. You might even want to ask them about that, of what sort of support can they provide for that, because there's some agencies that to them it's all just data and it's all just products on the website, and they're not as experienced or focused on that. And others may have experience either in your vertical or a similar vertical of helping companies expand their product lines.
All right. The next question up that we have is what is their approach to customization and flexibility?
So obviously a very important question to ask. You're really looking to see how adaptable they are, but there's also a bit of a gotcha in this question. And it's interesting. It's actually someone that I've been consulting with recently. He basically, you would think that you would want someone that says, oh, you know what, we can get an extension for anything you need, or we can get a Shopify app for anything you need. We'll keep your development costs low. All your customizations will be via these extensions and apps. Well, this person was actually complaining about that because they said, well, first of all, they just had way too many apps installed, but also that their agency kept recommending apps to them that didn't actually meet their business needs. And as they dug in deeper, they realized they didn't have the technical expertise to do customizations on this platform. So they just kept going to extensions and apps. And if that didn't meet the need, this agency didn't know how to help the merchant. And so you really want to make sure there's a balance there. So you want someone that, when it makes sense, is using something off the shelf, but also isn't afraid to say, hey, here's how you can build a custom solution to meet this need.
Well, the last question we have here, and this is a good one always, can they provide case studies or client testimonials?
Yeah, definitely. And this is where, again, if you're looking for overly specific case studies or testimonials, that can get tricky, but they should at least have a few people that you can talk to that can, and usually I would look not just for, hey, was the project successful, but ask these references more specific questions like, what's it like to work with them? What's the day-to-day of working with them? And again, you're almost looking for that cultural fit beyond just a basic, yes, the project was successful, or no, it wasn't. And really with all these questions and with this whole process, find an agency that'll say no to you. And I think that is something that so many people, there's this attitude of the customer is always right. We like to be treated that way. But again, I had some great conversations lately about other agencies where projects went sideways, and it was because they prioritized above all else, always say yes to the client. You want an agency that will actually say, you know what? Understand, but that's not the best way to solve this, or that's not the best way to grow your business. And that can really drive a much better relationship between your company and the agency.
And it shows a level of expertise in the overall process, and that's so important. Well, Josh, as we kind of wrap this and summarize and kind of put the bow on it and everything on this podcast, what's that right partnership really look like, and the key takeaways?
Yeah. So the right partnership, it's like any other partnership, really. It's a partnership. I think there's so many situations where the merchant will look at the agency as you're a vendor or you're a cost center. And the agency will look at the merchant as you're a source of revenue, you're a source of profit. And that is not, you break it down, that's involved. Money is always involved in this, but the right partnership really looks like a partnership. And it looks like understanding each other's businesses, understanding each other's motivations, and having some shared goals together and really growing together. And that's the most successful projects I've seen have really fit that pattern of both the merchant and the agency are growing together throughout the project. And
it's like hiring the best, your best employee. Mm-hmm. When that fits, it's just a fit.
Yeah.
Anyway,
really
put it all together for us, Josh. We need to wrap this one up.
Yeah. So a long-term relationship with an agency that fits and that meets all these things we've talked about for your business can deliver amazing results. I think most importantly for you, the e-commerce director, it can make your life better because it can make your job a little bit easier, your boss a little bit happier. So it's so important to get this right. And I'm really excited for next week's episode. We're actually going to talk about when it goes wrong and what to do if you have the wrong platform or the wrong agency, because sadly that does happen pretty often.
All right. Well, guys, we really appreciate you being on board to hear all about how to choose the right agency and get the right key factors, avoid mistakes, and ask all the best questions. As always, want to let everyone know to reach out to Joshua Warren on LinkedIn and definitely take advantage of a free 30-minute e-commerce problem-solving session. Anything else you want to add?
No, just find me on LinkedIn. I've got the gold background. As always, I guess we're also looking for guests for Commerce Today. So come join us on the podcast. But yeah, all that you can do off of my LinkedIn profile.
Outstanding. Well, as always, we thank you for joining us and take care. We'll look forward to catching you next time.